Waterline writers, we gather to hear original creative work from all styles and all genres. If you're a writer, and I know a bunch of you out there are, you can participate. You can submit your work, published or not, to waterlinewriters@gmail.com. And you can find more information on our website at waterlinewriters.org. We have a special call for submissions for our March show. We're going to coincide with Water Street's art exhibit, and the theme will be Climate Crisis Solutions. We seek both prose and poetry. The poetry is going to be judged by Kristen Latour, who I don't think is here tonight, and the winner will have his or her work performed by performance artist Luis Mexico. See the program for more information. In addition to our featured writers, we will have an open mic tonight after the main event. If you're planning to read, there's a 5-minute limit. If you didn't get a chance to sign up yet, when you got here, there is a clipboard over there by where Ginny is sitting, and you can sign up during the break. For those of you who donated $5 at the door, we really appreciate your generosity. The proceeds tonight will go to the writers. If you buy a book from one of our authors tonight, we'll refund your $5 donation. See the camera? We're recording tonight's event for broadcast on BATV, and we also put the videos up on our website. We don't do the open mic, we just do the featured writers. Enrollment is now open for a class called Take My Word For It. This is a national program for kids 8 to 12. The classes are held at Water Street Studios, which is where we normally meet, beginning January 21st, which is a Wednesday, from 4 to 5 p.m. And there's more information about that in tonight's program also. Okay, enough of me yapping. On to the first writer. Eric Bodwell writes poetry, apparently not often, he tells us, but more as he gets older. He's never had any of it published, and he's really looking forward to having that happen. Eric is a high school librarian living in North Aurora with his lovely wife and their cat. Eric, please come on up. There he is.
Hi, I'm going to read some of my poems tonight. The first one is called The Library at Night. They say, write what you know. So it's a poem about a library. So, Library at Night. While surveying the shelves, silent and still at the end of the day, I often wonder about the stories and facts having gone home to their parallel neighborhoods. Stories in frayed spines like row houses lived in too long, down one block to the next, at the dinner table, shouting over the cacophony just to be heard while passing butter biscuits, pierogies stuffed with sauerkraut or meatball and rotini. Later on, the windows open, some asleep after making love, others worrying about the next day's work of exposition and denouement. At midnight, the facts still awake across town in their high-rise apartments, ideas bundled like old newspapers in every corner of their rooms. They sit under desk lamps, heads bent down into almost dawn, carefully ordering the universe with their keyboards, documenting the implications of everything seen and unseen. The next one is, I guess it's sort of a political poem, in a way. It's called, tentatively, I'm calling it America. At 25, I was lost in the tangle of your highways, beguiled by your tender box of ideals. First love unburdened by what came after, intentions and questions stumbling out like children to recess. 20 years later, America, what happened to us? I'm bored with your Intamin's apple pie, your Coke Zero, your Nike slogan billboards. I'm done with the deadbeat dreams you still mumble about at night after too much Pinot Grigio. I'm worn down by the same dead boy war stories you tell at parties, always eager for an audience who will nod and agree when I can't anymore. The tired and the poor you leave discarded like clothes on the bathroom floor. Your bloated malls, shuttered libraries, and museums, you never did take care of yourself. The distrustful demons at the core of you listening to my phone calls, tracking the distractions on your televisions, sneaking glances around street corners, obsessing over what I might do now or tomorrow. I surrender, America. To turkey meatloaf and a recliner on Sunday nights, to working later for a newer dream, to waiting for you to change and always knowing what comes next. If you're, say, under the age of 40, you might appreciate this, or if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, it's a poem called Mixtape. The rules, of course, were relative. The Cure, then Prince and the Revolution, and Minor Threat and Marvin Gaye and Independent Clause, a sentence never understood by our parents. The whir, hiss, pop of my dual cassette boombox, song choices and segues, a complete syntax. The art of saying what I never found in the love poem stumbling out of me at 16, to the girl with dyed blue hair and the carefully ripped Susie shirt, who read Sartre in the shade outside the cafeteria, whose name I never knew. This one is a poem about my mom, who, unfortunately, she died a couple years ago from a somewhat rare form of cancer. It's called A Last Letter, so it's addressed to her. This is what I need to tell you. You carried home with you, wherever it was needed, rebuilding lives with beef stews and quick breads. You stitched the distance between all of us together like a well-worn winter coat. You were the neighborhood where all of our hearts lived. But that summer, you were just a voice that traveled alone along the wires, the emptiness subtracting you as the doctors added tests and treatments and no diagnosis. What was I to do when you called, naming the sickness, as you made lists and plans for all of us, preparing for what came after? A sturdy pioneer into nothingness in the spaces between the stars. This is a poem to my wife. It's a love poem. I find as I get older and I'm married longer, I find that the day-to-day is easier and the long-term picture is more complex. So that's kind of what it's about. It's called What I Will Find. I have been writing this poem for years, each syllable the work of weeks or months, the metaphors, similes, and alliteration, the punctuation of our small or wide silences, the cluttered and comfortable rooms of our days, the truths of the other lives we invent from our couch, and the gentle, confounding geography of you are all stacked and put aside until one still, early and restless February morning, you still asleep, I will find all of it in an old shoebox, tossed underneath the stairs among the sweaters and blankets. Maybe then, the poem spread out across the coffee table, I will find the stanzas, the enjambments, the meaning living outside the last line. A couple more. This one is called At Blessed Souls Pentecostal. Something that sort of happened, not quite like this, but it became a poem. Though we only attended Blessed Souls Pentecostal Church once, I was 5 and knew how to wonder at such things. The choir stomped the painted concrete floor, clapped, urged us on to glory in heaven, shouted back at the dark crouching outside the corrugated walls. Everyone swayed like drunks, tongues on fire, spilling the Holy Spirit onto supplicating hands with words they didn't understand. Even my mother, who knew all the stories in heaven, waited in line for redemption from the anointed hands and amens of that black-suited preacher. That night, too, I tried praying with the same holy code, stacking syllables like Legos in whatever order I found them. Having heard nothing by morning, I knew God had never left Blessed Souls Pentecostal Church. This last one is called From the Handbook on Leaving. When I was growing up, I moved around a lot, and I always thought, I'm sure I could probably be an expert and write a handbook about that. So I wrote this poem, if you will, considered an excerpt from such said handbook. Honesty is necessary here to finish the work. The Buddhists tell us attachment is death, or at least unhappiness. Take an inventory. The anger you boxed in cardboard on the closet shelf in case you needed it. A kiss from last year folded in half, creased at the center, faded at the edges, still marks the pages in the novel you were reading that afternoon. The regret you have bottled and placed in the back of the pantry among the paprika and olive oil. In the weeks of summer, tossed in with the Christmas ornaments in the attic. Give the kiss to a friend, forget that you left it in between the cushions on her couch. Untangle the summer from the ornaments and drop it in the snow in the park near your apartment. The anger and the regret should be left out on trash day or in an abandoned field at 2 a.m. If you leave the letting go to finish on its own, you will find it one winter morning in the pocket of your robe as if you had never left. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks. That love poem to your wife kind of raised the bar for some of us at Valentine's Day, so thanks for that. Okay, our next writer, Mary Swanson, has 3 children who have been teenagers their whole lives. Her 91-year-old mother, who survived Mary's teenage years, sanity intact, is her inspiration. When life gets stressful, as it often does, Mary uses her favorite coping mechanism, Facebook. Mary, please.
I took my son to Portillo's for a hot dog when he was 6 years old. He was impressed by the many thousands that they had sold, but he was so concerned about how all those dogs got along without their wieners. I think prison sentences should be replaced with shopping for a dance dress with a 15-year-old. I just got back from Christmas in Puerto Rico, where size large implants appear to have been on many, many wish lists. My son says college food is pretty good. Well, he can thank me for setting the bar low. 3 years ago, my daughter chose the Anti-Cruelty Society for her charity, and even though I told them not to, they continued to send me solicitations. So I told my dog he's ugly and stupid. My husband entered the kitchen as we were filling our plates for the serve yourself supper. He hesitated ever so slightly when I told him there was a bun in the oven. How to embarrass your teenager, number 1574. Wait until his friend is in the car and then make a loud beeping sound as you back out of the driveway. This may reduce future opportunities for transporting the kids, but it's guaranteed to make you laugh all the way home. My daughter tells me I'm not supposed to dance like there's no one watching. I'm supposed to dance when there's no one watching. I joined AARP, and immediately the skin on my upper arms began to sag. It's the boy's 3rd day with a driver's license, and I still have Valium left. How is it driving without a parent in the car, I asked him. Peaceful. When my kids get their own places, I'm going to go over and kick ice cubes under their cupboards. Another sign of aging, your teenage son is envious of your facial hair, and you're the mom. I ran into a friend in the grocery store. We had a nice long chat. 2 hours later, I remembered her name. Prom is tomorrow, so I ask him, "Are you ready?" And he replies, "Well, I should probably learn to dance." My vitamins are labeled mature. I don't think they're working. A man at the health club said, based on my calves, I must be either a hockey player or a runner. So I checked him. My boy turned 20 today, so now when we play the so big game, he really is. I thought the driver of the car in front of me was my husband, so when it stopped and put on the flashers, I pulled next to it and rolled down the window. I'm not sure who was more surprised, the woman delivering newspapers or me. My younger son went with friends to Summerfest in Milwaukee and stayed overnight with my older son who lives there. "Did you have any trouble waking up early to head home?" I asked him. "Nah, Chris hit me on the head at 6. It's a beautiful day to take the dog for a long walk, but I didn't have much time, so we just went around the block, in the car. But I played a Nature Sounds CD. My daughter says I'm not allowed to roll down the car window and shout hello to her friend who's on a school field trip with 25 classmates. Oops. I don't want to admit I just spent 5 minutes looking for my cell phone while I was talking on it. I will admit I was both relieved and troubled when I found it. I took our French exchange student to his next host family. He said he created lots of memories during his stay with us, probably many things I was hoping he'd forget. Meditation just doesn't work for me. Maybe it's my mantra. I suck at this. My new workout pants have an international size tag, US M, Japan XL. I am so not going to Japan. And the last one, and yet another reason why teenagers should not have babies. My son thinks chlamydia is a lovely girl's name.
Thanks, Mary. Our next writer, Leonard Lund, is the author of 5 poetry chapbooks and 6 volumes of aviation history. Along with 24 articles on military technology, his poems and short fiction have appeared in the pages of over 60 journals and anthologies since 1965. Over the last year, these include Poetry Storehouse, Non-Binary Review, Copperfield Review, River Poets Journal, Crisis Chronicles, Postcard Poems and Prose, Poetry Quarterly, Drunk Monkeys, Children Churches and Daddies, Lake Poetry, and The Binnacle. 2 chapbooks and a collection of short stories are planned for release this year. Leonard, I know you're back there. Oh, there you are.
Normally, my biography is all of about 3 lines long. Pretty unassuming on my part, but microphones love me, I'll tell you. Anyway, Ann asked me if I wanted to write anything longer, and I said, oh, what the heck. And I can't believe I said all that stuff. It's not normally me. I spent the last 4 years at Lewis University down in Romeoville, not going to school but selling textbooks to people who were. And part of the thing there was that I was invited into the embrace of the English department and the creative writing department. And we spent an awful lot of time talking with students about where art comes from and why we write and things like that. About a half dozen poems to read you this evening. The first one goes back to 1974 when I was an undergraduate student up at Northeastern, and I would spend the time between getting out of class at Northeastern and going to work for the night, because I did both full-time, sitting in the library in Blue Island and looking at books of art. And in this case, the piece of art was a landscape by Fra Bartolomeo, an Italian artist. And this is titled Arbor and Wine Press. This is where you brought me when we wed. I, 15 and not yet quick with child, though filled with longings passed down by my mother and her own. You, 18, and poorly educated to a life not set before you in the halls your father brought the tutors to. The copse of trees is thinner now, as is my life these years alone. The room in back, where first we took each other with an innocent savagery bordering on rape, is mine alone, a shrine holding memories that end with you. At the gate, our oldest son and his son, a tomcat that came to clear the mice and stayed when they were done, a wine press calling forth the joy of life. The mist grape is as fruitless as imagined lives without this place. Everybody should have a vampire poem in their portfolio. I used to moderate a writers group, and my co-moderator had a thing about vampires, rather embarrassingly. She thought they were the greatest things to slice bread, and everything to her was vampires. So, one vampire's wish is dedicated to Kai. Who told you vampires never age? That's a crock. I'll bet they told you we only drink the blood of virgins, too. Where do they get this stuff? I'm so old, virgins just don't do it. There have been so many. It gets boring. And frankly, I'm not all I used to be. You know what I mean? My joints ache when the moon throbs on the horizon. Thunder hurts my ears, and the rain is hard to fly through. You try it sometime, okay? All I really want is someone to come home to, a woman to rub my feet, tell me I'm forgetful but not batty, to sit around the house and have a drink with. And if one vampire poem is good, two are probably even better. Lynn and I, my wife and I, were at a meeting in the basement of a restaurant where the bar area was one time, and they had an Irish slogan, which I found out later is probably more Scottish than Irish, emblazoned on the wall. They speak of my drinking, but never my thirst, and thus railing at the light. Then I will speak of it, though they fear the sound of my voice, of my tread, the thread of their being breaking with a rail at my lips. I was cast into life like any of them, expelled from the womb to cry around the blood, and after birth to change. And I was sucked into death and beyond, drained of what I was, to cry out for blood, and afterward be only the same. Bloodless, I thirst to briefly fill my veins again. Satiated, I hunger for something, someone, anyone, to warm the emptiness. The ages blur in passing, but the hours, the nights, they crawl like my shadow at a door when clouds betray the moon. God, who might love me still as I love you or not, do I compound the blasphemy when I feel forsaken? I used to love the rising sun. Back in 1970, Lynn and the younger of my two uncles, who was about 9 years older than me, our youngest daughter, who was 1 at the time, and I went to Disneyland. I was stationed out of San Diego at the time with the Navy. That grandson, or that daughter rather, is the mother of our oldest grandson, who is now back from Afghanistan. Mother and child. When you were 1, we spent the day at Disneyland. Your mother, my uncle, and I took turns watching you in your stroller from ride to ride. That night in your crib, you gazed wide-eyed for an hour, digesting, I guess, what you'd seen, and then smiled sweetly in your sleep. You won't remember, but we talk of it still. It's early in the 5th decade since that day. Your son is back from his war just as I was from mine. His gaze across the dinner table is hooded, distant. I hope when he's a father, he'll dream of wondrous times, and fear that when he's a grandfather, he'll scratch at hidden scars and remember his bodies at the end of the day. And I think last but not least, definitely not least, this is an elegy. It's the closing piece of my 4th chapbook, which is an anti-war collection of poems. Along with being a Vietnam combat vet, I'm also a pacifist and was discharged from the Navy as such, sort of a influential pair of events. Lynn and I are breeders of Bernese Mountain Dogs. We have been for the last 20-some years. And probably the hardest part about being a dog breeder is when you've got a puppy that dies in the first couple days out of a litter. You know, they never really stand a chance sometimes. And so this elegy expands on that. Dig the small grave and place the smaller body so, just so. The chill May rain and the warm human tears falling on her head will serve for the ritual washing of this pup, barely 2 days old. Some future digger after truth, alien or human, kneeling with trowel and brush at this grave, will note in clear, careful script the wonder that a people would be so deliberate with the smallest of their God's creatures and so careless of themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leonard. Sorry about the mic. Yeah. The Elgin Literary Festival is shaping up to be a really big deal. It's February 6th through the 8th. And you should go on the website. I think there's information on the program. They've got quite a lineup set up already. Anne Vague, standing in the back there, will be conducting 2 workshops during that festival. One is called The White Page on Saturday, February 7th from 1 to 4 p.m. And she will be conducting her Galleries Are for Writers 2 on Sunday, February 8th from 2 to 3:30 at Side Street Studios in Elgin. There's more information on the Elgin Literary Festival in the program, but it's looking like a pretty cool event. Another open mic, in fact, it was just last Thursday, a few days ago, Paul Latour's Lit by the Bridge is held at Culture Stock in Aurora on Galena Avenue. And the next event is February 19th at 6:30. And we had about 25 people last Thursday. It was a really nice time. Thanks to Krista and Eric Anderson from Fresh Ground Coffee Roasters for tonight's coffee. And we are going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back with our final 2 writers. Thank you. His name is Glenn Hefner, and he's a technical writer who has authored many painfully boring software user guides over the last 20 years. Back in his college days, he always said he would someday write fiction. Why? Because, as he puts it, there's so much humanness I would like to explore. His work so far includes 6 short stories. The Reminder, which is the one he is reading tonight, is the 5th of those 6. Now, this story is a tad bit longer than our normal readings, so I'm just giving you a heads up. He has been given special dispensation, so if it starts to feel like, hey, this guy is in Waterline, he's reading way too long, we gave him permission. Glenn, please come on.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Anne. Thank you, patrons, for being here. This is literary fiction, not genre fiction. It's a complete short story. It's titled The Reminder. I hope it takes you away. If any of my friends had been with me, they all would have agreed that I drank too much that night. Guilty I was, and I can prove it, as I let brandy, of all things, pass through my throat just to see what could happen with the redhead. The strange thing about this was I didn't like redheads much. And freckles gave me kind of a sick feeling back then, too, despite that I have a few of my own. So why did I let her hang on me? Well, for one, redheads have a distinct and shameless, in my experience, proclivity for all things sex. For two, she did rest her hand on my thigh about 1.5 inches away from my stuff. This I know I'm remembering correctly because it occurred to me at the time. This distance is the thickness of a stud. And I privately snickered at the thought that possibly she thought she'd found one. I thought I was fairly good looking that night, worthy of the attention she was slathering on me. It had to do with the way my hair obeys in the wintertime, and the new Pima shirt that sat just right on my shoulders and cuffed out right where my knobby wrists wanted it to. Looking back, though, it was too much like having your ducks in a row. The fact you do doesn't mean you need to shoot. And there was one other thing that made the blur from all that brandy such a welcome lens. My pre-law classes weren't going very well. As a young man, I was very much of a mind that I should learn whatever I wanted to learn and ignore the rest. This was a phase, but I had thought it was a trademark. I made no bones about the difficulties with school, even told the bartender, who had no reason to care. So the only reason telling him makes any sense is that this was one of those personal facts one tosses to the world to prove how open and honest he is. Reflections on a trusted book always remind me, whenever I tell my story, that things like the trouble in my classes and the prospect of this hot companion, and let's throw in here too the fact that Veronica, whom I'd often referred to in those days as a godsend, had yelled at me that afternoon for a shameful indiscretion she was right about. That these were not reasons for drinking. That I drank for one single reason, the constitutional inability to resist the lure of alcohol. The jury is still out on this, but sobriety does feel a lot like coming home, and it's so good to be home. Being an orphan, boo-hoo. Being in hock for my education, oh well. But regardless of whether these were contributing factors, the things the other strangers did to me later that night wouldn't have happened if they weren't doing them to a blacking out drunk. I can still hear the bartender knocking the bottom of my glass against the bar and saying, I guess that'll be it. At that point, I leaned toward the redhead and mumbled, maybe some other night what? But she was already gone. Her coat, her purse, everything. Her leggings, her clever lips. I slapped the cash down, too much I'm sure, and gave my best rendition of an okay me in a wobble toward the door. I deliberately yawned to try to convince the good man, whose back was already toward me and whose mind was fixed on his register tallies, that I was only tired, as if I'd hoped he'd forgotten how much he'd served to me. It made him glance over his shoulder, and when he did, he hollered out, didn't I want that white lighter that I left on the bar? No, I didn't, but the okay me thought I should go back and get it, because that's what a sober guy would do. A sober guy wouldn't have even bought it. When the redhead drifted out the first time to smoke, I jogged across to the quick stop and bought the lighter so I could be the gentleman who would fire up all of her next ones. White I picked for gallantry. White night. It got a lot of use. There's something in how a woman caresses your hand when you light her cigarette. It gives the man the sensation of being appreciated, and that's never been a small thing to me. A fresh layer of snow on the parking lot surprised me, and I slid around and flailed like Scotty Hamilton on steroids. This ineptitude must have shaken me because I sat with a gratitude grip on the steering wheel for as long as it took the defroster to clear the windows, and then I continued to sit a while. I remembered having told the redhead, whose name I still couldn't retrieve, we could build a fire at my place, how nice that would be. She made a peaceable groan, like the purr of a well-fed cat, and took another sip of her brandy Manhattan. So, now alone, I was trying to dial up a picture of whether I'd like a fire for myself when I got home. Operating the truck proved easier than I'd feared. Sometimes you get a little gift like that, the unexpected skill, and begin to contemplate what it might have been a Benny for. Was it for good behavior? For not taking the redhead home? At least for not taking her home without telling her about Veronica? Was it for not arguing back? For letting Veronica's verbal punches hit me without hoping she'd feel guilty for throwing them? Or was it a positive sign about me, an indication that my self-assessments are conservative, that I'm prone to think I'm more drunk than I really am, and this will serve me quite well in a future of marginal alcohol abuse. The competence to drive was a gift in any case. But like a nail without a hammer, it stopped being of use when the engine power fell in a steady taper. I recognized this as fuel pump failure and pulled to the only length of shoulder available, which was short, but long enough for me to get the whole truck off the road before it died. I turned lucid. Still 6 miles from home, I wasn't going to get there by walking, but I couldn't stick with the truck. So intoxicated like I was, there was no taxi service in town. There were a few near the U, but they wouldn't come all the way out here, I knew. I would have to appeal to someone to drive me. I'd start walking, get away from the truck first, then thumb. I got a couple 100 yards and realized if I'm carrying my keys and I'm wasted and my truck is a little ways back, this constitutes proof that I had been driving drunk. So I went all the way back to put the keys in the ignition. The second time, when I reached the sharp left curve sign where it had the epiphany about the keys, it dawned on me my house keys were still on the ring, dangling from the ignition. This was tough, very tough. To believe as I did, when you experience luck, a meter starts to run. And yes, ultimately, you will run out of luck. I knew going back a second time posed more than twice the risk of a DUI. I went anyway. But for the first time all night, I trembled all the way. That's why I was so glad when a van stopped to pick me up pretty soon after I grabbed my house keys. I might skate, I thought. I whispered, "Just call me Scotty," right before climbing in. I could smell the weed. These folks in the van seemed to be tying a good one on of their own, and more power to them, I thought. They had given me the seat by the sliding door. The driver was Dale, who smoked one after another what looked like shorty, unfiltered cigarettes. He introduced his girlfriend, Marta, who rode shotgun, and his kid brother, Eric, in the captain chair next to mine. There was something not right with Eric. I could tell by the way he kept grinning and laughing too long after each thing this group found amusing. His face looked a little off, too, although in the dark interior I couldn't quite tell in what way. But then, who was I to think that somebody else looked a little off? Then I found out they were on a mission. We were. They were headed for Dale's brother's house. His brother was out of town on business. Dale's sister-in-law was having an affair. If the actor, they would make him regret the whole intrigue. If he wasn't, they would make the sister-in-law abandon it. With every little detail Dale shared, Marta would half turn her face toward the back and smile. This made the whole sinister disclosure oddly agreeable to me, though of course it shouldn't have. There was something in that smile. Marta was not beautiful or even necessarily pretty. I had just never known a woman so possessed of the capacity to be okay with everything around her. If she were in charge, she would never have devised this brash visit, and if someone else suggested it, she would have decisively nixed it. But not being in charge, she could be at peace, even find the funny in the terribly unfunny. I found this almost unbearably attractive in her. And this is the only reason I can think of why I didn't protest when Dale crossed my highway without so much as touching the brakes, even after I said, "Hey, guys." It's not that I didn't try again to get home without becoming an accomplice to the scheme that so likely would have a bad end. I remember thinking, they resonate to silliness. So I deployed a measure of it. I said, "As your lawyer, and yours, let me explain something about tort law. Dale, you be the party of the first part. No, the second part. This proved to me, in the same way it was proving to them, that the party of my part was still plastered. But Marta loved it. My legal nonsense triggered her sense of humor to dance in the moment, and that further charmed me. She teased first part and shoved Dale's shoulder, then no, second part, and did it again, then rested her palm on my knee. Her tenderness instantly roused me into an awakening far more sensual and sophisticated than the redhead's play had done. When I drank, I tended to exaggerate and treasure nearly all things for how amorous they made me feel. So I credited her with many other abilities she hadn't demonstrated. And having trusted Marta, I trusted, by extension, this whole bunch. When she and Dale began to whisper, I thought they were amused, so I poured it on. Your Honor, may my clients have a moment to discuss this turn of events? Thank you, Your Honor. But this time only Eric heard me. He slapped his knee and shouted, Your Honor, 3 times between his guffaws. Thinking Dale might have been plotting yet more devious ways to blow up his sister-in-law's stasis, I gave goofiness one more litigious shot. Let us turn to the constitutional rights of the party of the fourth part. Let us say, for example, she has cookies in the oven. But this, too, evoked no reaction from Dale or Marta. Eric started to bounce in his seat, and I found myself shushing him. I was getting either bold or frightened. Beyond a bluff on our right, the roadway offered a shoulder, and Dale pulled off onto it. Before he jumped out, he said he needed to fetch the flashlight from under my seat. I groped for it, but couldn't locate it by the time he slid my door open. Marta turned toward me and whispered, You'll be all right, honey, and punctuated her assurance with one of those ever-innocent smiles. Dale grabbed me just above my right elbow and tore me from the van, and then hollered over my head, Eric, help me out here. Eric did, seized my left arm the same way. The two of them dragged me to a barbed wire fence and threw me over it. From the ground, I saw them each in turn, Dale first, Eric mimicking, step on the highest wire and bounce over it into the pasture. This had to be a sheep ranch. I knew roughly where we were, but because I did, I also knew we were tens of miles from help. They dragged me about another football field until, when Dale yelled, Now! They threw me face down onto the ground. And as they did, Dale kicked both legs out from under me, and my shins immediately felt like toothaches. I didn't try to move at first. The kick had told me they were not just getting rid of me, they were at least willing to risk that I not survive. So I played as if I lacked the strength to. I lay still and watched them the whole time, at first squinty, then wide-eyed, until they got back into their van and began to drive off. Then I let a few more minutes pass, just to make sure they weren't coming back to check on me. These minutes I used for regret, and then remedial planning. I would walk south, deeper into the pasture, hoping to find either a sheep shelter or a ranch house. When I finally stirred, I found my right cheek was stuck, frozen to the ground. Nothing I did to try to free my face caused pain because my face was numb, but everything about it scared me. Every time I tried, I failed. Success would mean trading my countenance, which at various times had been called unequivocal and magnetic, to win back my life. I would take a seat at that bargaining table if I had to, but not yet. My fingers were numb too, so to feel around for something, anything, I had to use the tops of my hands. This turned up a clump of sage florets the size of a baseball, which I pushed under my neck so a puff of wind wouldn't take it. This is when I realized I should thank Providence for the bartender's extra care. I remembered the lighter in my front pocket. I let a small laugh out at the fleeting thought that maybe the redhead's hand on my thigh was a grope for the lighter and was hinting nothing more than that. It dawned on me right there that a sense of humor is a gift. And maybe mine is not as big as Marta's, but mine could carry me, perhaps all the way out of this dilemma. I tried hot breath to loosen the hold the ground had on my cheek, but that quickly made it worse because the frozen area had broadened. I felt the whole side might become stuck, and in that case, there would be no tearing away, even if I resigned to losing a good deal of my face. Vision would be a problem, as dark as it was, but I had to find a nearby tumbleweed if there was one. It would take contortion, but I knew I had to use each hand in front of my face, which itself had no range to rotate. One hand would operate the lighter, while the other shielded my eyes from its glare. Excuse me. I was now prepared to declare something as being miraculous, because only 3 or 4 feet away was a good tumbleweed. I would light the sage and flick it to land under the weed. Not easy and utterly final. If it worked, the weed would burst into a modest ball of fire, short-lived, but big enough to be seen from some distance if anyone happened to be so near and looking this way. So I would wait. Maybe a car would appear. If not, I would hope for the impossible coincidence of some ranch hand having a gander out here right when the ball ignites. To this day, my friends don't believe the next part. They get that I waited and waited. They don't see honesty in my account of the thoughts I had while I did the waiting. I found it easy to be on high alert and still reflect on how I got there and how I wanted me to be if I were lucky enough to get out. Of course, I acknowledged the stupidity of drinking like a fish. But I also gave remarkable credence to a notion that the little signs of good cheer I'd observed from Marta had a lasting, settling effect on me, and that this may have kept me from altogether giving up. I'm convinced it made me ready and dexterous when headlights did hit the road above me. The driver was a deputy who saw my blazing tumbleweed and came down into the pasture. When I was able to hear her boots crunch, I grunted so loudly I didn't sound human. I'm not sure why I didn't use words to direct her to me, but I didn't have to. Once there, the good woman took my word for it and didn't try to lift me. She called the fireman she'd summoned and asked him to bring down some tools. "Fast, Johnny, fast," she hollered into her radio. I heard him come back with something garbled, but she answered, "Not vitals, not yet." It was only minutes before the fireman stood over me with a crowbar and a propane torch. By what I now think of as genius, he alternated punching deeper and deeper holes into the frozen ground near my head and shooting flame into them doggedly until the earth relented. The next morning, dressing to leave the hospital room, I found fragments of shearling from the inside of my jacket in the pocket of my jeans. So retrieving the lighter must have been strenuous, although I recall it feeling like only an exercise of a treasured privilege. The strands glistened in the sunlight. Severe frostbite had claimed a large patch of skin from my cheek. The tissue died forever in the shape of an upside-down pear. Several doctors and even more friends over the years have prodded me to have a graft procedure to fix it. But I'm still finding it easy to dismiss the urge to have that done. When the persistent ones ask why, I usually tell them I don't know, and that's mostly true. I walk away from the question thinking, though, how this scar is as much a part of me as any feature I carry from earlier in life. I have fancied it, almost like a badge of honor, even though I don't see anything honorable in my behavior that night. I'll tell strangers it's a birthmark. My future eventually landed like a balloon losing air in the homeowner's insurance business as an adjuster, where claimants tend to find me a pushover, as I always work under the assumption they're telling the truth. Yet I'm at ease with this, knowing they are in charge of their realities, and that I only offer them possibilities. I stand beside an imaginary gate while they pass through or don't. Acceptance, I have come to think, is what lights up the path toward all the essential truths, from the gnarly to the simply natural. This I've never read anywhere but between the lines in the tale of my own young life, mine and Marta's. That's the end, folks. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. Our final featured writer this evening is Roger Breisch. Roger has taught high school. He was a manager for a Fortune 100 company in the chemical industry, owned a management consulting company with his father for 15 years, and most recently ran the Batavia Chamber of Commerce. In the midst of all this professional stuff, Roger chaired the Batavia 4th of July fireworks for 17 years, which, if you've never come to Batavia for the fireworks, you're really missing something. It's a spectacular show. He's worked with teens in an anti-alcohol, anti-drug program for 9 years, and he has spent more than 2,500 hours answering calls on a suicide hotline. More than 15 years ago, Roger began the annual 4th of July American Dialogue to discuss our hopes, fears, and dreams for the community, nation, and the world. Today, Roger loves challenging audiences to see how their thinking prevents them from finding true happiness and success. He and Judy, his wife of 32 years, have 2 grown children, and you can read more about Roger at his blog. It's rebreisch.net. Roger, please.
Thank you very much. After hearing Glenn's story, I'm now also swearing off of alcohol. Thank you very much. I wrote this piece several years ago, but since I admit to my age in here, let's say it wasn't that many years ago. I call it a single day of eternity. As I approach 60, the moment of turning the calendar from one year to the next gives me pause. I wonder if I will have left a legacy. Will I have helped humanity move forward, or might my life have been, as a dear friend once fretted, a throwaway line? I ponder the best way to spend the 365 days I gently step into on January the 1st. In those moments, an image painted by Henrik Wilhelm van Loon in his wonderful book, The Story of Mankind, comes to mind, and I quote, "Up in the north, there stands a rock. It's 100 miles high and 100 miles wide. Once every 1,000 years, a little bird comes to this rock to sharpen its beak. When the rock has thus been worn away, a single day of eternity will have gone by." We live under the shadow of a gigantic question mark. Who are we? Where do we come from? Whither are we bound? Slowly, but with persistent courage, we've been pushing this question mark further and further towards that distant line beyond the horizon, where we hope to find our answer. We have not gone very far. End of quote. I find this image of a single day of eternity compelling In the face of an eternity this unimaginable, I feel small and insignificant. I recall standing in the presence of the giant sequoias in California and marveling that many have lived thousands of years. Many were alive through the entirety of the current era. They lived through the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, the Middle Ages, and the rise and fall of the divine right of kings. To them, the ink on our Declaration of Independence has yet to even dry. American representative governance, the world wars, the Holocaust, the Vietnam War happened moments ago. And yet, even to them, Van Loon's single day of eternity is unimaginable. Then imagine living the life of a mayfly, often less than a single day. As you begin to mature by mid-morning, you're wondering about the species' evolution. You see so many ways in which it falls short of the enlightened state of which you dream. By midday, you're working tirelessly for the betterment of your fellow mayflies. Within hours, as you age, you become distraught because in spite of your lifetime of dedication and effort, little has changed. The species is no less selfish, its lifespan hasn't increased, there's no less violence between you and those with whom you compete for resources. You wonder if there's any hope for the future. I imagine that species is awed that a human such as myself has witnessed tens of thousands of their generations. We might witness the mayfly and smile. How silly to imagine that in such a short lifetime an insect could actually witness evolution. And I wonder if the sequoia look at us with the same mix of wonder, whimsy, and pity. And yet as humans, we live with the hubris to imagine that in our lifetime, or certainly within a few generations, we will experience the advancement of our species into something significantly new and wonderful. Not only do we expect to have witnessed advances in evolution, we believe we will have personally contributed to forward movement so significant we can actually witness growth. Then as we age, we become distraught because in spite of a lifetime of dedication and effort, little has changed. The species is no less selfish. Its lifespan hasn't increased. There's no less violence between us, and those with whom we compete for resources. We wonder if there is any hope for the future. If it's naive to expect that my life will make a noticeable difference in the course of human history, what then? How should I decide what to do? How shall I spend the moments I'm given in the year ahead? One answer to that question, and there are many, rests in the flapping of the wings of butterflies. The butterfly effect tells us that in a minute air disturbance in one part of the world can, through a complex and unpredictable chain of events, foster a tornado halfway around the globe. And the butterfly that set that future into motion has no idea of its impact thousands of miles away, months or years later. The future unfolds based upon initial conditions. An infinitesimally small change in this moment can, as a single day of eternity transpires, allow an entirely new, dramatically different future to blossom. So what I think about as I step into the 365 days that begin on the 1st of January, is what initial conditions am I creating in this moment? Is the wisp of air I'm disturbing filled with joy, kindness, and generosity, or anger and hatred? Am I aware of the pain and heartache in the face of the stranger next to me, or am I focused on me and my needs? What can I do in this moment to give the future the very best foundation on which to begin its next day of eternity? My stay on this earth is far too short to witness the impact of the initial conditions I set. So all I can do is have faith that the future will best be served if I serve this moment in the most loving and attentive way I can. So for me, life is a constant struggle to meet and negotiate with each and every moment. As I approach the next, I hope to serve it the best I can as I inhabit it and it inhabits me. And then perhaps I must simply trust that the single day of eternity of which both of us become a part will take care of itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. You're always so darn positive. There's a workshop for poetry and spoken word. It's called Wordplay, and it happens at Water Street Studios, and it's the fourth Friday of every month. So those of you who are into poetry and into spoken word, you might want to check that out. Ann Vague conducts a class called Galleries Are for Writers Too. It's a drop-in writing time at Water Street Studios. There's no sign up, you just show up, and the writers use the artwork for inspiration and write accordingly. There is a $5 suggested donation. It's held on the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th Sundays of the month at 7 p.m., except for February 8th, because she'll be at Side Street Studios that day. Our next event at Waterline is February 15th. Put it on your calendar, please. We should be back to Water Street Studios for that event. I would like to thank all of our writers tonight: Eric Bodwell, Roger Breisch, Glenn Hefner, Leonard Lund, and Mary Swanson. I'd like to thank our volunteers: Mary McHugh, Frank Rutledge, Barbara Barrows, Nick Markavichus, Ginny Klespitz, Paula Garrett, and Kristen Latour. Once again, thank Fresh Ground Coffee Roasters. The City of Batavia, by the way, for letting us use this nice space in our day of emergency here. And most of all, thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. We really, really do appreciate it. So thank you. Good night.